Some gifts are too precious to recognize until they're gone. Deep in the Shadowmere Mountains, where the wind cuts like broken glass and winter has forgotten how to end, the Iron Peak clan made a decision that would shake the very foundations of their ancient world. They traded away 17-year-old Kira Thornwick, the silver-haired girl who could forge steel stronger than any master smith, who could read the mountains' moods in the way snow fell, to settle a debt that meant the difference between their survival and slow starvation. What they didn't know was that Kira bore the star mark, a crescent-shaped birthmark that glowed like captured moonlight, marking her as the lost heir to the Mountain King's throne. For 20 years, King Aldrich Stormborn had sent riders through every pass and village, searching for the daughter stolen from his castle in a raid that left his queen dead and his heart shattered. While Kira was learning to swing a hammer and survive on scraps, an entire kingdom mourned their missing princess. Now, as Kira awakens to powers that can command stone and storm, she faces an impossible choice: embrace a crown she never wanted, or watch the mountain clans destroy each other in a war that her very existence could end. But can a girl raised in poverty truly become the queen her people desperately need? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hammer fell against red-hot steel with a rhythm that matched Kira's thundering heart. Each strike sent sparks dancing through the dim forge, illuminating the silver streaks in her dark hair that caught the firelight like captured lightning. She'd been working since before dawn, trying to drown out the whispered conversations that had plagued the clan hall for weeks, conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. "Another blade for the Ravenhollow tribute," she muttered, quenching the steel in a hiss of steam that rose around her like accusatory spirits. The weapon gleamed perfect and deadly in her calloused hands, far superior to anything Master Jorik could forge, despite his 30 years at the anvil. It was a gift that had earned her grudging respect among the Iron Peak warriors, but lately felt more like a curse. "Kira," a guardian's voice cut through the forge's warmth like the mountain wind. Mira Thornwick stood silhouetted in the doorway, her weathered face carved with lines that spoke of 3 years of endless winter and rationed meals. "Set down the hammer. They're calling for you." The steel slipped from Kira's fingers, clattering against the stone floor. She'd known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like one of the avalanches that claimed unwary travelers. "It's me, isn't it? The payment they've been discussing." Mira's silence was answer enough. The great hall felt smaller than usual, thick with wood smoke and the weight of desperate decisions. Clan Iron Peak's remaining elders sat around the carved stone table that had witnessed generations of war councils, their faces gaunt with hunger and hollow with shame. At their head, Chieftain Gareth's massive frame seemed diminished, his famous red beard now streaked with premature grey. "Kira Thornwick," he began, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for pronouncing sentences. "You know the terms of our debt to Clan Ravenhollow." She straightened, calling upon the same steel she forged to steady her voice. "I know we owe them for the grain shipments that kept us alive through the worst of the starving months. But I thought 500 weight of iron, 20 breeding goats, and a craftsman of exceptional skill." Elder Brenner's words fell like hammer blows. "We have neither the iron nor the livestock, but your abilities at the forge." She gestured toward the weapons Kira had crafted, each one a masterwork that outshone anything produced by their enemies. "You're trading me like livestock." The words tasted of ash and betrayal. Gareth's fist struck the table, making the wooden cups jump. "You think this comes easy? You think we haven't explored every other path?" His voice cracked with anguish. "But Ravenhollow holds our children's lives in their hands. Without their continued grain shipments, we'll lose half our younglings before spring returns, if it ever does." Kira's gaze swept the assembled faces, searching for an ally, a voice of dissent. She found only the desperate resignation of people pushed beyond their limits. These were the men and women who had raised her after her parents died in a clan raid, who had taught her to forge and fight and survive. Now they sat like judges at her execution. When? The question came out steadier than she felt. Tomorrow at first light, Mira whispered from behind her. Ravenhollow's escort is already camped in the lower valley. That night, Kira stood on the cliff's edge behind the forge, watching moonlight paint the snow-covered peaks silver. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying the scent of approaching storms and the distant howl of winter wolves. Somewhere out there, beyond the treacherous passes and feuding territories, lay Ravenhollow lands, a place she knew only through stories of their cruelty and their chief's notorious hatred for anything touched by Iron Peak hands. She pressed her palm against the crescent-shaped birthmark beneath her collarbone, feeling its familiar warmth pulse against her skin. In moonlight like this, Mira had once mentioned, the mark seemed to glow with its own inner light. A fancy, surely, just the imagination of a woman trying to make an orphan child feel special in a world that offered little comfort. The mark pulsed again, and for a moment, Kira could have sworn she heard something on the wind. Not the wolves' lonely chorus, but the sound of hoofbeats, distant but drawing closer. Riders moving through the night with purpose and urgency, as if following a call she couldn't hear. She shook her head, dismissing the notion as nerves and exhaustion. Tomorrow, she would leave the only home she'd ever known, traded away to save the people who were abandoning her. Tomorrow, she would begin a new life among enemies who saw her as property rather than person. What Kira couldn't know, as she stood shivering in the mountain wind, was that 20 miles to the north, King Aldrich Stormborn had finally received word of a silver-haired smith's apprentice with unusual skills. His fastest riders were already racing through the night, following a lead that had eluded them for 17 years. But they might already be too late. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the wind's mournful song, leaving Kira alone with her racing thoughts. She pulled her woolen cloak tighter against the bitter cold and turned back toward the settlement, her boots crunching through snow that had grown deeper with each passing day. 3 years of endless winter had taught the Iron Peak clan to waste nothing, not warmth, not food, and certainly not time dwelling on fears that couldn't be changed. But as she walked past the darkened workshops and huddled cottages, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting in the mountains tonight. The very air seemed charged with possibility and dread, like the moments before lightning split the sky. Couldn't sleep either. Kira spun toward the voice, her hand instinctively reaching for the belt knife that had been her constant companion since childhood. From the shadows of the grain storehouse stepped Finn Blackwater, his lanky frame wrapped in a patched leather coat that had seen better decades. At 19, he was one of the few young men who hadn't yet been claimed by war or winter, and his easy smile had been a bright spot in Kira's life for as long as she could remember. Finn. She exhaled slowly, allowing her shoulders to relax. You nearly ended up with a blade between your ribs. Wouldn't be the first time your reflexes saved my hide. He fell into step beside her, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Remember when we were 12 and I thought it would be clever to sneak up on you during weapons practice? Despite everything, Kira found herself smiling at the memory. Master Torvin spent an hour lecturing you about the wisdom of surprising armed opponents while you held Snow to that split lip. Worth it to see you laugh. Finn's expression grew serious as they walked, though I suspect laughter will be scarce commodity tomorrow. They paused before the forge, its stone walls still radiating warmth from the day's work. This building had been Kira's true home for 5 years, ever since Master Jorik had grudgingly admitted that her unusual strength and intuitive understanding of metalwork surpassed his own abilities. She knew every tool's weight, every flame's temperament, every piece of iron's potential. The thought of leaving it behind felt like tearing away part of her soul. The weapons you've made will protect Iron Peak warriors for generations, Finn said softly, following her gaze. Even the Ravenhollow smiths will learn from your techniques. If they don't simply claim credit for my work, and set me to hauling coal and sweeping floors. Kira traced her fingers along the forge's doorframe, where 17 years of daily passage had worn smooth grooves in the wood. What do you know of their clan, beyond the stories meant to frighten children? Finn was quiet for a long moment, considering his words with unusual care. My cousin served as a messenger between the clans before the current hostilities began. He said their lands are richer than ours, more sheltered valleys, better soil, but their chieftain, Aldwin Ravenhollow, has grown harder since his eldest son died in a border skirmish 3 summers ago. They say grief turned his heart to stone, and now he owns me. The words tasted bitter as wormwood. No one owns you, Kira Thornwick. The fierce conviction in Finn's voice made her look up sharply. You're like the steel you forge, shaped by fire and pressure, but never truly broken. Whatever comes, you'll find a way to make it yours. They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow begin to fall in thick, lazy flakes that would likely dump another foot by morning. Around them, the settlement slept fitfully, plagued by the same hunger and uncertainty that had haunted their dreams for months. These people, difficult, stubborn, proud people who had raised her with calloused hands and fierce love, would wake tomorrow to find one of their own gone forever. Will you watch over Mira? Kira asked suddenly. She pretends to be strong, but losing another daughter, she couldn't finish the sentence. Mira had lost 2 children to clan raids before taking in an orphaned Kira, and the weight of that accumulated, grief, showed more clearly each passing year. She won't be alone, Finn promised. None of them will. And when this cursed winter finally breaks, when trade routes open again, I'll find a way to get word to you. Maybe even visit, if the clans can hammer out a lasting peace. Kira nodded, though they both knew how unlikely such hopes were. The mountain clans had been feuding for generations, their conflicts as enduring and seemingly eternal as the peaks themselves. Still, hope was sometimes all that stood between survival and surrender. A door creaked open across the courtyard, and Mira emerged from their cottage, her silver hair braided for sleep, but her eyes alert with worry. She raised one hand in a gentle wave, not calling Kira inside, but simply letting her know that warmth and comfort waited whenever she was ready. Tomorrow would bring farewells and fear, unknown faces and uncertain futures. But tonight, Kira was still home. Kira raised her hand in acknowledgement and started across the courtyard, her feet heavy with more than just the clinging snow. Each step felt like counting down to an execution. Finn walked beside her, neither of them speaking as they approached the cottage that had been her sanctuary for as long as memory served. Try to get some rest, he murmured, squeezing her shoulder before melting back into the shadows toward his family's dwelling. Dawn comes whether we're ready or not. Mira waited in the doorway, her weathered face etched with the kind of pain that came from watching loved ones slip away beyond reach. She'd worn that same expression when the fever took her youngest son, when raiders claimed her daughter, when winter claimed her husband. Now she would add Kira to that litany of loss. Come inside, child. The cold serves no one tonight. The cottage's interior wrapped around Kira like an embrace from better times. The hearth crackled with carefully rationed wood, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with Mira's weaving. Tapestries that told the history of Clan Iron Peak in threads of grey and silver and deep mountain blue. The small table still held the remnants of their meager dinner, 2 wooden bowls that had contained more broth than substance. Mira busied herself preparing chamomile tea, her movements precise and familiar despite the late hour. It was what she always did when words felt inadequate. She brewed tea and let the ritual speak what her heart couldn't voice. You don't have to pretend for my sake, Kira said quietly, settling onto the wooden bench they'd shared for countless evenings. I know this is killing you. The older woman's hands stilled on the clay teapot. When she turned, tears tracked silver paths down her cheeks. I've buried children before, but I never had to hand one over breathing and whole to people who might... She couldn't finish the thought. Who might break her? Kira completed gently. I'm stronger than you think, Mira. The forge taught me that. The forge taught you to shape metal, not survive among vipers. Mira poured the steaming tea with shaking hands. Ravenhollow clan is not like us. They value cunning over honor, wealth over loyalty, and their treatment of outsiders. A sharp sound cut through the night, 3 horn blasts echoing off the mountain walls in rapid succession. Both women froze. That sequence meant one thing: riders approaching under darkness, moving fast enough to trigger the outer sentries. Could be Ravenhollow's escort arriving early, Mira whispered, but uncertainty colored her voice. The agreed meeting time was dawn, not the depths of night. The horn sounded again, followed by shouts from the direction of the main gates. Not the organized calls of guards greeting expected visitors, but urgent warnings that spoke of surprise and possible threat. Doors began opening throughout the settlement as people stumbled from their beds, pulling on whatever clothes and weapons came to hand first. Kira was already moving toward their own weapon rack, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Her fingers closed around the familiar weight of the iron-headed spear she'd forged for herself, not as elegant as a sword, but devastating in the right hands. If this is Ravenhollow coming to claim their property ahead of schedule, you don't know that's what this is. But Mira was strapping on her own belt knife, the blade Kira had made for her last winter as a gift. Could be raiders from the eastern clans or worse. They stepped outside to find the courtyard erupting with controlled chaos. Warriors emerged from their homes carrying whatever weapons were closest, while clan elders shouted orders that sometimes contradicted each other. Through it all, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew steadily louder, multiple riders moving at dangerous speed through terrain that claimed lives even in daylight. Chieftain Gareth appeared at the Great Hall's entrance, his massive frame silhouetted against the firelight within. "Form defensive positions." His voice boomed across the settlement. Unknown riders, at least a dozen, approaching from the North Pass. The North Pass. Kira's breath caught. Not the lower valley where Ravenhollow's escort was supposed to be camped, but the treacherous mountain route that only the most skilled riders attempted in winter. Whoever was coming had been willing to risk their lives for speed. "Kira!" Gareth's voice cut through the commotion. "If this is about you, if word of the trade arrangement has reached the wrong ears..." He didn't need to finish. Border clans sometimes raided specifically to capture skilled craftspeople, and news of Iron Peak's desperation might have traveled faster than anyone anticipated. The thought of being claimed by strangers, even more ruthless than Ravenhollow, made her grip tighten on her spear. But as the riders crested the final slope before the settlement's walls, something glinted in the moonlight above their heads, banners snapping in the wind, bearing symbols none of them recognized. Not the crimson raven of Ravenhollow, nor the crossed hammers of any border clan. These riders carried the silver mountain crowned with stars that belonged to legends, not living men. The Mountain King had come calling, and Kira Thornwick's carefully ordered world was about to shatter completely. The silver mountain crowned with stars, a symbol Kira had seen only in the oldest tapestries, woven when her grandmother's grandmother was still a child. Stories whispered around winter fires spoke of the Mountain King as myth made flesh, a ruler who commanded storms and bent stone to his will. But myths didn't ride through blizzards in the dead of night. "Impossible," Gareth breathed beside her, his voice barely audible above the wind. "The Mountain King is legend, a tale to comfort children during the worst storms." Yet there the banners flew, untouched by the howling wind that should have shredded any normal fabric. As the riders drew closer, Kira could make out their forms, 12 mounted figures in armor that seemed to drink moonlight, moving with supernatural grace across terrain that had claimed dozens of experienced warriors over the years. "Everyone inside the Great Hall," Gareth commanded, his voice cracking with uncertainty. "Now!" But Kira found herself frozen in place, her spear forgotten in suddenly nerveless fingers. The crescent-shaped birthmark beneath her collarbone had begun to burn with an intensity that made her gasp. Not pain exactly, but a deep thrumming warmth that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the approaching hoofbeats. She pressed her palm against it through her wool tunic, trying to muffle the sensation, but it only grew stronger. "Kira!" Mira's sharp call snapped her back to awareness. Whatever's happening, standing in the open won't help matters. Around them, the settlement erupted into barely controlled panic. Warriors who had faced border raiders without flinching now stumbled over their own feet, weapons trembling in hands that had never known such fear. This was terror of the unknown, of powers beyond mortal understanding. Even the mountain wind seemed to hold its breath as the riders approached. What if this is about me? The thought struck like a physical blow. What if somehow these beings know about the trade agreement? The possibility sent ice through her veins colder than any winter storm. Being traded to Ravenhollow was terrifying enough. At least they were human, motivated by understandable desires for grain and iron and revenge, but creatures of legend, beings who might view her as something to be collected rather than bargained for. "I have to run," she whispered, the words surprising her with their vehemence. "If they're here for me, my presence endangers everyone. I should flee south, lose myself in the border territories, and go where?" Mira's weathered hand closed around her wrist with surprising strength. "Child, you don't even know if this has anything to do with you. Mountain kings, real or imagined, have concerns beyond one smith's apprentice." But the burning sensation in her birthmark suggested otherwise. With each passing moment, as the riders drew closer to Iron Peak's walls, the warmth intensified until she could barely think past it. Her parents' faces swam in her memory, not the worn, beloved features of Mira and the clan elders who had raised her, but older images, half-remembered dreams of gentle voices and silver-streaked hair like her own. "Stop," she commanded herself fiercely. "Those are fantasies, orphans' dreams of noble birth and grand destinies. You're a blacksmith's apprentice whose clan can no longer afford to feed you." The horn sounded again, 3 long blasts that echoed off the surrounding peaks. But this time, the sound came from the approaching riders themselves, not a war cry, but something that might have been a greeting, or a summons. Chieftain Gareth stepped forward, his massive warhammer gripped in both hands despite the obvious futility of the gesture. "By what right do you ride armed into Iron Peak lands?" he called, his voice carrying the authority that had led their clan through 2 decades of border wars. The lead rider raised one gauntleted hand, and the entire company came to a halt perhaps 50 yards from the settlement's outer walls. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the distance despite its conversational tone, another impossibility that sent fresh whispers rippling through the assembled clan. "I am Lord Captain Marcus Stormwind, sworn sword to His Majesty King Aldric of the Mountain Realm." The words fell like stones into still water. "I seek audience with one called Kira Thornwick on a matter of utmost urgency to the crown." The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring. Every eye in the settlement turned toward Kira, and she felt the weight of their combined stare like a physical force. Her legs threatened to give way beneath her, and only Mira's steadying hand kept her upright. "This is impossible," the thought repeated like a mantra. "Mountain kings are stories. I am nothing, a tradesman's apprentice whose only value lies in my skill with hammer and forge." But the birthmark burned against her skin, and somewhere deep in her bones, she heard an echo of recognition that terrified her more than any enemy blade ever could. The Mountain King's men had come for her, and she had no idea why. The moment stretched like molten iron, malleable and burning. Kira could feel the weight of every gaze in the settlement pressing against her, could hear Mira's sharp intake of breath, could sense Chieftain Gareth's confusion radiating from his massive frame. But beneath it all, the birthmark pulsed with increasing intensity, as if responding to some call only it could hear. "I," her voice cracked on the single syllable. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing steel into her words the way she forced strength into heated metal. "I am Kira Thornwick." The admission hung in the frigid air like a blade poised to fall. Lord Captain Stormwind dismounted with fluid grace, his armor catching moonlight in ways that defied natural law. When his boots touched snow, she could have sworn the ground itself trembled in recognition. "By order of His Majesty King Aldrich, I am commanded to escort you to the capital immediately." He reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a scroll sealed with silver wax that seemed to glow with its own inner light. "You are summoned to answer for crimes against the crown, or to claim what is rightfully yours. The choice, Lady Kira, remains to be seen." Lady Kira. The title struck her like a physical blow. No one had ever called her anything but Kira, or Smith Girl, or in Finn's more generous moments, the Iron Maiden of Iron Peak. But this stranger spoke her name with the reverence reserved for nobility, as if he knew something about her heritage that she herself had never suspected. "There's been some mistake." Chieftain Gareth stepped forward, his hammer still raised despite its uselessness against armored cavalry. "Kira is clan-born, raised among us since infancy. She has no connection to—" Silence. The word from Lord Captain Stormwind carried such absolute authority that even Gareth's voice died in his throat. "The birthmark speaks louder than any clan loyalty. Show them, girl. Let them see what you've hidden all these years." Kira's hand flew instinctively to her collarbone, pressing against the burning crescent through her tunic. "How do you know about—" "Because I've spent 17 years searching every peak and valley for that mark." The captain's voice softened fractionally, taking on an almost paternal warmth. "Because my king has aged a decade for every year his daughter has been missing, and because tonight, under the full moon's light, your heritage can no longer be denied." The words hit like hammer blows against an anvil, each one reshaping her understanding of herself. Daughter.heritage.missing. The concepts refused to fit together in any way that made sense. She was Kira Thornwick, blacksmith's apprentice, soon to be traded to Ravenhollow for grain and peace. She couldn't be. "You're frightening her." Mira stepped protectively in front of Kira, her weathered hands spread wide despite facing armored warriors who could cut her down without effort. "Whatever you think you know, she's just a girl, our girl. Your girl bears the star mark of the royal bloodline." Lord Captain Stormwind's tone remained patient but implacable. "Look for yourselves if you doubt." As if compelled by forces beyond her control, Kira found herself pulling aside her tunic's neckline. The crescent birthmark blazed silver against her pale skin, pulsing with light that matched the glow emanating from the captain's armor. Gasps echoed around the courtyard as clan members who had known her all her life saw their foundling revealed as something far more than they had ever imagined. The lost princess. The whisper came from old Henrik, the clan's memory keeper, whose voice shook with wonder and terror. "The babe stolen from Castle Stormhold the night winter came to stay. Everyone thought she was dead. Princess." The word echoed in Kira's mind like a stone dropped into an endless well, not traded goods or unwanted burden, but royalty. Born to command rather than serve, to rule rather than hide among the peaks scraping for survival. The revelation should have felt like liberation, like every orphan's dream of noble birth finally realized. Instead, it felt like death. "I won't go." The words surprised her with their vehemence. "I don't care about kings or crowns or birthrights. These people raised me, loved me, gave me purpose. I won't abandon them for some stranger who calls himself my father." Lord Captain Stormwind studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable behind his helm. "I'm afraid, Lady Kira, that you no longer have a choice. Your clan faces starvation, your people war, your land an eternal winter that only royal blood can break. The realm has need of you." He remounted his destrier with the same impossible grace, the animal pawing at snow that hissed and steamed beneath its hooves. "You have until dawn to gather what you need. We ride with the sunrise, with or without your consent." The captain wheeled his mount around, his men following in perfect formation as they withdrew to the settlement's edge. But his final words carried clearly through the mountain air. "The Mountain King's daughter comes home at last." The silence that followed the captain's departure felt heavier than the mountain snow pressing down on the settlement's rooftops. Kira stood frozen in the courtyard, her birthmark still glowing faintly beneath her tunic, while every member of Clan Ironpeak stared at her as if she had transformed into something alien and dangerous. Their lost princess. The thought tasted like ash in her mouth. Not their traded burden, but their royal secret. Inside, Mira commanded, her voice cutting through the shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd. All of you, gawking serves no purpose, and dawn comes whether we're ready or not. The clan members dispersed reluctantly, shooting glances over their shoulders that held equal measures of awe and fear. Kira understood their confusion. She felt the same vertigo, as if the solid ground beneath her feet had revealed itself to be quicksand. Everything she had known about herself, every certainty that had anchored her identity, now seemed as substantial as morning mist. "Come," Mira said softly, taking her arm with the same gentle firmness she had used when Kira was small and reluctant to leave the forge. "We need to talk." But before they could reach their cottage, Finn emerged from the shadows near the smithy. His usual cocky grin had vanished, replaced by something raw and desperate that made Kira's chest tighten with unexpected pain. "So it's true, then." His voice cracked slightly on the words. "You're really leaving us? First for Ravenhollow, now for some king who doesn't even know you." "Finn," she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Do you know what your royal blood means for the rest of us?" The words dripped with bitter sarcasm. "If you're truly the lost princess, then Clan Ironpeak has harbored a kidnapped royal for 17 years. That makes us criminals by association, traitors to the crown." The accusation hit like a physical blow. She hadn't considered the implications for her adoptive clan, too overwhelmed by the revelation of her own origins to think beyond her personal crisis. But Finn was right. If Lord Captain Stormwind spoke truth, then everyone who had sheltered her, fed her, taught her to swing a hammer and speak with iron had unknowingly committed treason. "That's not how it works," Mira said firmly, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "We found her as an infant, half dead from exposure. Saving a child's life can't be considered kidnapping." "Try explaining that to a king's justice," Finn retorted. "Try telling him we had no idea who she was when she bears a royal birthmark that apparently glows like a beacon under moonlight." Chieftain Gareth's heavy footsteps announced his approach before his massive frame materialized from the darkness. His face bore the weight of command decisions that could mean life or death for everyone under his protection. "The boy raises valid concerns," he said without preamble. "If King Aldrich believes we took his daughter deliberately, Clan Ironpeak faces annihilation. We're already weak from this endless winter. We can't survive a war against the crown." "Then what do you suggest?" Kira's voice came out sharper than intended, anger finally breaking through her shock. "That you hand me over to save yourselves? Trade your princess for royal mercy instead of grain?" The words hung poisonous in the air between them. Gareth's expression didn't change, but she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "I suggest," he said carefully, "that you consider your duty to the people who raised you. If going willingly with Stormwind protects the clan, prevents bloodshed, you want me to sacrifice myself for people who were ready to trade me away anyway." The accusation tasted like copper in her mouth. "At least be honest about it." "That's different, and you know it," Mira interjected, stepping between them before the conversation could escalate further. "The Ravenhollow arrangement was about survival. This is about the same thing it's always been about," Kira interrupted, her control finally snapping. "What's convenient for everyone else? What serves the clan's needs? What keeps the greater good intact while Kira Thornwick disappears into whatever role others decide she should play?" She turned toward their cottage, desperate to escape the weight of their expectations and fears. But Finn's voice stopped her at the threshold. "What if you're wrong?" he called, and something in his tone made her turn back. "What if being a princess means you can actually help us? Help everyone?" The captain mentioned ending winter, stopping wars. "Maybe this isn't about sacrifice. Maybe it's about becoming who you were always meant to be." The words carried a strange echo of recognition, as if some buried part of her had been waiting to hear them. For a moment, the birthmark's warmth spread beyond her collarbone, filling her chest with something that might have been purpose. Then reality reasserted itself, cold and unforgiving as mountain stone. Or maybe, she said quietly, it means becoming someone I'll never recognize in the mirror. The cottage door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the iron hinges she had forged herself only months ago. Kira pressed her back against the rough wooden planks, breathing hard as if she had run the entire length of the mountain pass. The familiar space, with its worn furniture, banked forge coals, and the faint scent of Mira's herb tea, felt suddenly foreign, as if viewing someone else's life through thick glass. Princess. The word echoed in her skull like a smith's hammer against an anvil, reshaping everything she thought she knew about herself with each repetitive blow. Mira entered quietly, her weathered face etched with lines that hadn't been there an hour ago. She moved to the hearth and began stoking the fire with mechanical precision, the routine task clearly serving as an anchor against the chaos that had engulfed their world. "Your father will want to see you," she said without looking up. "Your adoptive father." Davik's been pacing the forge since the riders appeared, muttering about signs he should have noticed, marks he should have questioned. Kira's throat constricted. In all the shock and revelation, she hadn't considered how this would affect the quiet man who had taught her to read metal's moods, who had praised her steady hands and patient temperament. Davik the smith had never spoken much, but his pride in her skills had been evident in every nod of approval, every new technique he had shared. "He knew," she whispered, the certainty settling like lead in her stomach. The birthmark, the way I could sense when iron was ready to work, the strange dreams. He had to have suspected something. Perhaps. Mira finally turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Perhaps he simply chose to love his daughter rather than question her origins. "Is that such a terrible crime?" The gentleness in her voice nearly shattered Kira's remaining composure. She wanted to collapse into Mira's embrace, to be comforted like the frightened child she felt herself becoming. But the birthmark's persistent warmth reminded her that childhood was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Lord Captain Stormwind spoke of ending winter," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Of stopping wars, breaking curses. What if Finn was right? What if I have some kind of power that could actually help? And what if you don't?" Mira's response was sharp with protective fear. What if this king sees only a tool to be used, a symbol to parade before his enemies? Power corrupts, child. I've seen it happen to chieftains and war leaders who started with noble intentions. Kira moved to the window, peering through frost-etched glass toward the settlement's edge where Stormwind's company waited like silent sentinels. Their armor caught starlight in ways that hurt to look at directly, and she could swear she felt their presence pulling at something deep in her chest. "The captain called it the star mark," she murmured, pressing her palm against the burning sensation beneath her collarbone. "Said my heritage couldn't be denied under the full moon. But I don't feel like royalty, Mira. I feel like the same girl who burns her fingers on hot metal and argues with Finn about proper hammer technique. That's exactly who you should remain." Mira's hand settled warm and firm on her shoulder. "Whatever blood flows in your veins, whatever crown they want to place on your head, that doesn't change the heart we helped shape, the compassion that makes you worry about your clan's survival before your own comfort. But it does change things," Kira said, turning to face the woman who had raised her. "If I'm truly the lost princess, then my presence here has endangered everyone I care about. And if I leave—" She swallowed hard. "If I leave, I might be abandoning my only chance to actually help them, to help everyone suffering through this endless winter." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Finn's voice carried through the door, stripped of its earlier anger. "Kira, your father wants to see you, and I'm sorry about what I said. This isn't your fault." She opened the door to find him standing in the snow, his dark hair dusted with frost and his usual confident stance replaced by uncertain vulnerability. Behind him, she could see other clan members moving purposefully through the settlement, gathering supplies, checking weapons, preparing for whatever morning might bring. "Are they afraid of me now?" she asked quietly. Finn's expression grew thoughtful. "Some are, others." He gestured toward the smithy, where golden light spilled from the windows and the sound of hammer on anvil rang clear despite the late hour. "Davik's working on something. Been at it since the riders left, and Gareth's called a clan council. They're not planning to simply hand you over, regardless of what he said earlier." The knowledge that her family, for they were her family, royal blood or not, was willing to fight for her sent warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the birthmark's mysterious properties, but it also crystallized the terrible choice before her. She could flee into the night, abandoning both the Mountain King's summons and the clan's protection. She could submit to Stormwind's escort and face whatever destiny awaited in the capital, or she could stay and watch everyone she loved suffer the consequences of sheltering a lost princess. None of the options led anywhere but pain. "I need to see him," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Davek, I need to see my father." The walk to the smithy felt like crossing a battlefield. Every step through the snow-covered courtyard carried her further from the girl she had been and closer to something she wasn't ready to become. The rhythmic hammer blows grew louder as they approached, each strike resonating in her chest where the birthmark pulsed with increasing intensity. Finn pushed open the smithy door, and heat washed over them in a wave that carried the familiar scents of coal smoke and hot metal. Davik stood at the anvil, his powerful shoulders working as he shaped something that gleamed silver in the forge light. Sweat ran down his face despite the winter cold, and his movements held a desperate precision that made Kira's throat tighten. "Da!" she called softly. His hammer stilled mid-strike. For a long moment he remained frozen, as if her voice might shatter whatever spell had driven him to work through the night. Then he set down his tools with infinite care and turned to face her. The pain in his eyes nearly drove her to her knees. "I failed you," he said simply. 17 years I've had to prepare for this moment, and I failed you. What are you making?" The question escaped before she could stop it, a deflection born of years spent understanding him through his craft rather than his words. He stepped aside, revealing his work. On the anvil lay a blade unlike anything she had ever seen. Not quite a sword, not quite a dagger, but something that seemed to shift between forms as the light caught different angles. The metal held the same silver luminescence as her birthmark, and when she stepped closer, she could feel power radiating from it like heat from forged coals. "Royal steel," Davek said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Folded 100 times with metal from the old mines, the deep places where starlight touches stone. It's yours by right of birth, though I pray to all gods you'll never need to use it." Kira reached toward the blade, then stopped as her skin began to burn with anticipation. "You've known all along, haven't you? About what I am?" "I've suspected." His massive hands trembled as he lifted the weapon, wrapping its handle in ceremonial cloth. The way metal responded to your touch, how you could sense its moods before you should have been able to. And the birthmark, he gestured helplessly. Your mother tried to hide it with powders and salves, but moonlight always revealed the truth. My mother? The words came out strangled. Mira isn't. Mira is your mother in every way that matters, Davik said fiercely. But the woman who birthed you, she was Queen Lyanna of House Stormhold. She died defending the castle the night you disappeared. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Not only was she royal-born, but her birth mother had died, possibly because of her disappearance. The weight of that knowledge settled on her shoulders like a mantle of lead, heavier than any crown could ever be. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me everything." Davik's weathered face aged another decade as he spoke. Winter came to the mountains 18 years ago, but not the natural cold of changing seasons. This was curse-born, punishment for some ancient crime none remembered. The old prophecies spoke of royal blood being the key to breaking it, but King Aldrich had no children. Then Queen Lyanna conceived, and for a moment hope returned to the realm. He moved to his workbench, retrieving a small wooden box she had seen countless times but never been allowed to touch. Inside, nestled in faded silk, lay a silver locket worked with the same starlight patterns as her birthmark. "You were born under a lunar eclipse, and the star mark appeared the moment you drew breath. The court mages declared you the prophesied heir, the winter breaker, the one who would restore balance to the realm." His voice dropped to barely audible. That night, raiders struck the castle. When the battle ended, the royal nursery was empty, and Princess Kira had vanished. "But how did I get here? How did you—" "I found you half frozen at the base of Widow's Fall, still wearing your birth clothes and this locket. You couldn't have been more than days old, more dead than alive." His eyes met hers, fierce with protective love. "I never knew if you fell accidentally or if someone tried to save you by throwing you clear of the battle. All I knew was that a child needed help, and asking questions might bring the wrong kind of attention." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Lord Captain Stormwind filled the smithy doorway, his armor gleaming like captured starlight. He surveyed the scene, the royal blade, the revealed locket, the truth finally spoken aloud, and nodded with grim satisfaction. "So," he said, his voice carrying absolute finality, "the lost princess remembers her true name at last." "Dawn breaks in 1 hour, Lady Kira. Your king awaits, and the realm's salvation hangs in the balance." Kira looked from Stormwind to Davik, to the blade that seemed to call to her very soul, and realized that everything she had ever been was about to end. The silver blade felt like grasping winter lightning. The moment Kira's fingers closed around the handle, power surged through her veins like molten metal, and the birthmark erupted in brilliant starlight that illuminated every corner of the smithy. For one breathless instant, she felt the mountains themselves responding to her presence. Stones singing in harmony, snow crystals dancing in spirals outside the windows, the very air crackling with ancient magic awakening after 17 years of slumber. Then the blade shattered, not cracked or bent, but exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments that scattered across the forge floor like fallen stars. The backlash of magical energy sent Kira stumbling backward, her hands burned and bleeding, while Davek's masterwork, hours of desperate love hammered into royal steel, dissolved into worthless shards. "Impossible," Stormwind breathed, his composure cracking for the first time since his arrival. "The blood calls to the metal. Royal steel cannot reject its rightful wielder." Kira stared at her ruined palms, watching silver specks embedded in her flesh fade to dull grey. The birthmark's radiance guttered like a dying candle, leaving behind only an aching cold that spread through her chest. "What does this mean?" "It means," came a new voice from the doorway, "that you are not who we believed you to be." The woman who entered moved with predatory grace despite her advanced years. Her snow-white hair was bound in the elaborate braids of a court mage, and her pale eyes held knowledge that cut deeper than any blade. Lord Captain Stormwind immediately stepped aside, his deference making clear this woman's authority superseded even his own. "High Mage Varen," he said tightly, "I was not expecting—" Clearly, her gaze fixed on Kira with surgical precision. 18 years of searching, countless divinations and scrying attempts, all focused on finding the lost princess. And what do we discover? A girl with the star mark who cannot even hold her birthright weapon. The High Mage approached the scattered remains of Davek's blade, murmuring words in the old tongue that made the fragments glow briefly before crumbling to ash. Fascinating. The metal recognizes royal blood but rejects royal authority, which suggests— She turned to study Kira like a specimen pinned for examination. "Tell me, child, have you experienced any unusual dreams? Visions of places you've never been?" Kira's voice caught. The dreams had been constant since childhood, soaring flights over mountain peaks, hands that commanded stone and storm, a presence vast and wild that felt more real than waking life. But she had always dismissed them as fantasy born from too many fireside tales. "She has," Devek answered when Kira remained silent. "Nightmares, mostly. She'd wake screaming about falling, about wings and shadows and dragons." The word dropped from the High Mage's lips like a death sentence. Not the tame creatures of legend, but the ancient worms who ruled these mountains before humans ever set foot on stone. Stormwind's face had gone ashen. "You cannot be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything." Veren's smile held all the warmth of a blade edge. "I'm stating fact. This girl bears the star mark because she carries royal blood, yes, but not human royalty. She is dragonborn, descended from the Skyfire lineage that once commanded winter itself." The revelation hit Kira like an avalanche. Not a lost princess, but something far more dangerous, the heir to creatures that had terrorized the realm for millennia before retreating to myth and memory. The endless winter wasn't a curse to be broken by royal authority, but a summoning call that her very existence had answered. "The dreams you experience," Veren continued relentlessly, "are ancestral memories. Your dragon heritage awakening as you reach maturity, and your inability to wield human-forged weapons, evidence that your true nature rejects the tools of those your kind once considered prey." "No." Finn's voice cracked across the smithy like a whip. He had been silent until now, but desperation finally drove him forward. "That's impossible. I've known her my entire life. She's human. She bleeds red, feels cold, cares about people." "Dragons are capable of love," Veren said dismissively. "They simply express it differently than humans do. Through domination, through the absolute control of everything they consider theirs." Her eyes never left Kira's face. "Tell me, child, when you're angry, do you ever feel the urge to burn things? When you're protective, does something inside you whisper about claiming and keeping and never letting go?" The accusation struck home with horrifying accuracy. Every possessive impulse she'd felt toward the forge, every moment of rage when she'd imagined reducing her enemies to ash, every fierce need to shield those she loved from harm, all of it suddenly carried sinister implications. "The Mountain King who searches for his daughter," Stormwind said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "He's not looking for the lost princess at all." "No," Veren confirmed. "He's hunting the dragon child whose awakening will herald the return of the ancient tyranny. And thanks to your clan's hospitality, she's finally ready to claim her birthright." Outside, something roared in the distance, a sound no human throat could make. The hunt had found her. The roar shattered the night like breaking glass, and with it, something fundamental shifted inside Kira's chest. Not the gentle warmth of the birthmark's glow, but a violent unfurling of power that made her bones ache and her vision blur. The air in the smithy suddenly felt too thin, too confining, as if her lungs were designed for something larger than this human form could contain. "Get away from me!" she gasped, stumbling backward as heat began radiating from her skin. The remaining metal tools scattered around the forge started to glow cherry red without touching flame. "Everyone get away!" But it was too late. The change was already beginning. Kira's reflection in a polished shield showed eyes that burned like molten silver. And when she opened her mouth to speak, smoke escaped instead of words. Her fingernails had elongated into something resembling claws, and the birthmark was no longer just glowing. It was spreading, silver lines racing across her skin like veins of starlight. "Magnificent," High Mage Veren breathed, making no move to retreat even as the forge fire roared higher without fuel. 18 years of dormancy, and now the awakening comes all at once. Can you feel them, child? Your true kin stirring in the deep places, answering your call? Another roar echoed from the mountains, closer this time, and Kira felt an answering vibration in her throat that terrified her. The sound wanted to escape, wanted to join that distant voice in a harmony that would shake stone from the peaks. She clamped her hands over her mouth, but the pressure only built stronger. "This is why the winter never breaks," Varen continued, circling Kira like a scholar studying a rare specimen. "The dragons tied their very essence to the mountain's heart before they vanished. As long as their bloodline remained dormant, the curse would hold, but now—" She gestured at Kira's transforming form with obvious satisfaction. "Now the last of the Skyfire line awakens, and with it the power to either rule winter or release it entirely." "I don't want to rule anything." The words came out as half-human speech, half-draconic rumble that made the smithy's stone foundations vibrate. Kira could feel her humanity slipping away like water through cupped hands, replaced by something vast and hungry and alien. "I just want this to stop." "Want is irrelevant," Stormwind said, though his hand now rested on his sword hilt. "The Mountain King has spent 2 decades preparing for this moment. Dragonborn or princess, you represent the key to ending 18 years of suffering. You will come with us, willingly or otherwise." "Over my corpse," Davek snarled, stepping between them with a smith's hammer in his massive fists. The tool seemed pathetic against armed knights and high magic, but his protective fury blazed bright enough to rival the forge fire. "Duh! Don't!" Kira tried to reach for him, then stopped in horror as she saw her hands. The transformation was accelerating, skin hardening into something that resembled scales, fingers extending into talons that could rend steel. "I'm becoming something terrible. I can feel it wanting to destroy, to dominate everything I touch." "No," Finn said fiercely, moving to stand beside Davek despite the obvious terror in his eyes. "You're still you. Whatever this magic is doing, whatever they claim about your bloodline, you're still the girl who cries over injured animals and shares her food with hungry children." But even as he spoke, Kira could feel those human impulses growing distant, overwhelmed by draconic instincts that whispered seductive promises. She could claim this entire mountain range as her territory. She could end the clan wars not through negotiation, but through absolute dominance. She could protect everyone she loved by controlling their every action, keeping them safe in a cage of her own making. The thoughts should have horrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. "The king approaches," Varen announced, her head tilted as if listening to voices only she could hear. He felt the awakening from his stronghold 50 leagues away. Soon this entire valley will be surrounded by forces you cannot imagine, knights wielding dragonbane weapons, mages trained specifically to bind creatures like what you're becoming. Through the smithy's windows, Kira could see the Iron Peak settlement stirring to life as the supernatural roars echoed through the night. Her clanmates emerged from their homes armed and ready to fight, unaware they were preparing to defend a monster wearing the face of someone they loved. "Choose quickly," Stormwind commanded, magical restraints gleaming in his hands. "Submit to the king's mercy or watch everyone in this settlement burn when the dragons you've summoned descend from the peaks." Kira looked at the faces surrounding her. Davek's protective fury, Finn's desperate loyalty, Varen's cold calculation, Stormwind's grim determination, all of them waiting for her decision, unaware that the girl they argued over was already gone. The dragon stirring in her chest had only one answer to give. The dragon's answer never came. Instead, something else stirred within Kira, not the alien hunger that demanded dominion, but a memory so human it cut through the transformation like a blade. Mira's weathered hands braiding her hair by candlelight, Finn teaching her to skip stones across the frozen lake, Davek's patient voice explaining how metal held the smith's intentions as surely as their skill. These are my people, she thought, and the simple truth hit the draconic instincts like ice water, not subjects to control, not territory to claim, family. The silver scales spreading across her skin faltered, their advance grinding to a halt as two natures warred within her chest. The dragon snarled at being denied, but something deeper, something forged by 17 years of love rather than blood, refused to yield completely. "I won't choose," she said, and her voice carried both human determination and draconic authority in equal measure. The contradiction should have torn her apart, but instead it felt like finding balance on a knife's edge. Not your king's mercy or my supposed birthright. There has to be another way. Veren's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. Fascinating. You're maintaining rational thought even as the awakening progresses. That should be impossible. Dragon nature is designed to overwhelm human consciousness entirely. Maybe that's because she's not entirely dragon, Davek said slowly, his protective stance never wavering despite the relief in his voice. Royal steel shattered because it couldn't reconcile opposing bloodlines, not because she lacked authority. Princess and dragon-born? Stormwind's composure cracked further. That's unprecedented, Veren finished, but now she was studying Kira with fascination rather than cold calculation. Two royal lineages in one vessel, human nobility that commands loyalty, draconic power that commands winter itself. No wonder the awakening is so violent. Your very existence defies natural law. Another roar echoed from the peaks, answered by a second voice from the opposite direction. Then a third. The ancient dragons were converging on the settlement, drawn by their lost kin's call, and behind them would come the Mountain King's forces in pursuit. "We're about to be caught between two armies," Finn said grimly, peering out the smithy window at the shapes moving through the darkness. "And we're standing at the center of what they're fighting over." Kira closed her eyes, trying to feel through the chaos of transformation to something resembling clarity. The dragon's instincts still whispered of dominance and control, but her human heart offered a different path, one that honored both sides of her impossible heritage. "Help me forge something," she said to Davik, her voice steadying as purpose crystallized. "Not a weapon designed for human or dragon alone, but something that bridges both natures. Something that can channel this power without being consumed by it." "Child," Veren said urgently, "there's no time for experimentation. The king's forces will reach us within the hour, and the dragons—" "Well, listen to me," Kira interrupted, silver fire dancing around her partially transformed hands. "I can feel their minds touching mine, confused and angry after centuries of forced sleep. They're not coming to destroy. They're coming because they recognize their blood in mine and don't understand why it's trapped in human form." Davik was already moving, his smith's instincts understanding what she needed before conscious thought caught up. Not royal steel alone then, and not the deep metals that answer only to draconic power. He began pulling rare alloys from their careful storage, materials hoarded against some future need that had finally arrived, something new entirely. "Iron from the human forges," Kira said, the hybrid nature of her heritage suddenly feeling like strength rather than contradiction. "Silver from the dragon hordes, and—" She looked at the shattered remains of the first blade, seeing possibility in destruction, the ash of what came before, to remember both failures and growth. Finn stepped forward without being asked, taking up the bellows to stoke the forge fire higher than it had ever burned. The flames responded to Kira's proximity, shifting from orange to blue to the silver white of starlight itself. "This is madness," Stormwind protested, but he made no move to stop them. Outside, the sounds of approaching forces grew louder, marching boots from the south, wing beats from the north, and in between, the Iron Peak clan preparing for a battle they couldn't possibly win. "Madness," Veren agreed, but her eyes gleamed with scholarly excitement, the kind that reshapes the world when it succeeds. "Very well, Dragon Princess. Show us what impossible bloodlines can forge when they work in harmony rather than opposition." Kira grasped the hammer Davek offered, feeling both her natures flow into its familiar weight. Human skill guided by draconic power, 17 years of love tempering centuries of sleeping fire. The real awakening was about to begin, not as conquest or submission, but as something entirely new. The first strike rang like a bell across the mountains, and the metal sang back in harmonies no human forge had ever produced. Kira brought the hammer down again, pouring 17 years of accumulated love and newfound draconic fire into each blow. The silver-iron alloy sparked and shifted under her hands, accepting both natures as if it had been waiting eons for this exact combination. "The dragons have stopped," Finn reported from the window, wonder creeping into his voice. "They're circling but not attacking. It's like they're listening." Kira felt their ancient minds brush against hers with each hammer stroke, confusion giving way to recognition, then to something resembling hope. They had slept so long in the deep places, bound by magic that demanded their heir remain hidden. Now that heir was awake and choosing a path none of them had imagined possible. Not conquest, she projected to them through the metal's growing song: partnership, balance, an end to the wars that have bled both our peoples dry. The response came as images flooding her consciousness, memories of the time before the endless winter when dragons and humans had built something magnificent together before pride and fear tore it apart. The vision wavered through her partially transformed sight, showing gleaming cities in mountain passes, shared knowledge, prosperity born from cooperation rather than subjugation. "The king's vanguard has reached the valley perimeter," Stormwind announced, his earlier hostility replaced by grim professionalism. "Dragon-born or not, they will not hesitate to use dragonbane weapons if they perceive a threat." "Then we make sure they don't," Kira replied, never pausing in her work. The blade taking shape under her hands was unlike anything she had ever forged, not quite straight like human steel, not curved like draconic talons, but something that flowed between forms as if alive. When she held it up to examine their progress, starlight seemed to move within the metal itself. "It's beautiful," Davek breathed, professional awe overcoming paternal worry. "And impossible. The molecular structure shouldn't hold. Iron and silver are naturally incompatible, and the temperature variations alone should have cracked the metal a dozen times over." "Magic helps," Varen said dryly, though her scholarly excitement was barely contained. "But this goes beyond mere enchantment. You're literally forging a new type of matter, something that exists in harmony with both bloodlines simultaneously." Outside, horn calls echoed through the night, the Mountain King's forces announcing their presence with ceremonial fanfare that barely concealed military threat. The Iron Peak clan responded with their own war horns, a defiant sound that spoke of desperation disguised as courage. Kira felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment, the clan wars that had shaped her childhood, the trade that had torn her from everything familiar, the revelations that had shattered her understanding of herself. Each decision had carried consequences that rippled outward like stones thrown in still water, and now those ripples were converging into waves that could either drown everyone she loved or lift them to something better. "I need to go out there," she said, setting down the hammer as the blade reached its final form. The weapon hummed in her grip, perfectly balanced between human craftsmanship and draconic power. "Before someone starts a battle that will destroy everything we're trying to save." "Absolutely not," Davek started. But Kira was already moving toward the door, the sword's harmony spreading through her transformed body like a missing piece finally clicking into place. The draconic scales didn't retreat, but they no longer felt alien, just another aspect of who she was meant to become. "This is what I was forged for," she said, and the words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Not to choose between my natures, but to bridge them. Not to rule or submit, but to create something new from the ashes of old failures." Finn caught her arm as she passed, his grip gentle but desperate. "What if it doesn't work? What if they see the dragon in you and attack anyway?" "Then I protect my family," Kira replied, covering his hand with hers. The scales along her skin caught moonlight like scattered stars. "All of my family, human and dragon alike. That's what this blade was made for, what he was made for." She stepped out into the night, leaving behind the familiar warmth of the smithy for air that crackled with tension and approaching storm. The settlement spread below her, torchlight revealing her clanmates taking defensive positions, while ancient shadows circled overhead. In the distance, the Mountain King's army waited like a steel crescent, ready to close. Between them stood one girl with impossible blood and a sword that shouldn't exist, about to discover whether 17 years of love could overcome centuries of hatred. The final confrontation had begun, and Kira Thornwick, dragon-born princess, blacksmith's daughter, bridge between worlds, was ready to finish what her very existence had started. The first arrow came from the darkness without warning, its dragonbane tip gleaming silver as it arced toward her heart. Kira moved without thinking, the hybrid sword singing through the air to deflect the projectile. Where metal met metal, sparks erupted in colors that had no names, not the orange of forge fire or the blue of magic, but something entirely new that painted the night in impossible hues. "Hold!" The Mountain King's voice boomed across the valley, carrying the authority of 2 decades spent building an army. "I would speak with my daughter before steel decides what words cannot." He emerged from the tree line like legend made manifest, tall as Devek but broader, wearing armor that seemed carved from the mountain itself. His hair was silver-streaked like her own, and when their eyes met across the battlefield, Kira felt the shock of recognition that went deeper than blood. This was the face from her dreams, the voice that had called to her through 17 years of unconscious longing. "Father," she whispered, and the word carried on wind that had turned strange, lifting her voice to every corner of the valley. Above them, the circling dragons landed with earth-shaking impacts, their massive forms creating a ring of ancient power around the settlement. The largest, scales black as winter night, eyes like molten gold, settled directly behind Kira with protective intent that needed no translation. "Sister-daughter heir," its voice resonated in her mind like distant thunder. "We have waited so long in the cold places. Show us the path home." "There is no path but surrender," the Mountain King declared, though his voice carried more grief than anger. "I have spent 18 years preparing for this moment, gathering every weapon that could contain draconic power. My daughter will come home, willingly or bound, before she destroys herself and everyone she claims to love." "I am home," Kira replied, raising the hybrid blade so its impossible gleam caught both moonlight and torchfire. "Here, with the people who raised me. But I'm also yours. I won't deny that anymore. The question is whether you can accept a daughter who refuses to choose between her 2 families." The king's expression shifted, surprise flickering across features that had been carved by decades of single-minded purpose. "You would claim both bloodlines? Child, that way lies madness. Dragon nature is not meant to be contained by human bonds." "Maybe not contained," she admitted, feeling the ancient power coiling in her chest like a living thing, "but guided, tempered, the way Davik taught me to work metal, not forcing it into unnatural shapes, but finding the form it wants to take and helping it become something beautiful." Behind her, she sensed, rather than saw, her clanmates emerging from their defensive positions. Finn's presence at her left shoulder, steady and unafraid despite everything. Davek's massive form blocking the smithy entrance, protecting Mira and the younger children while making his own allegiance clear. Even Jorik stood with them, the man who had arranged her trade, now ready to defend her right to choose her own path. "Pretty words," sneered a voice from the king's entourage. A woman in mage robes stepped forward, power crackling around her hands like trapped lightning. But dragons have heard such promises before, from humans who spoke of partnership while forging chains. "Your Highness, permit me to demonstrate why this experiment must end before it dooms us all." She raised her hands, and Kira felt the attack building. Not physical force, but something designed to tear her hybrid nature apart from within, to separate dragon from human so violently that neither would survive the process. The spell lanced out like a spear of pure dissolution, and Kira did the only thing that felt right. She didn't try to block it or deflect it or absorb it into herself. She shared it. The hybrid sword became a conduit, channeling the magical assault not into her alone, but into the connection she had forged between all her disparate parts. Human love, Draconic power, royal authority, Smith taught determination. The spell meant to tear them apart, instead welded them into something unbreakable. Light exploded outward from where she stood, washing over everyone present in waves that carried impossible truths. For one crystalline moment, every human felt what it meant to soar through mountain storms, while every dragon remembered the warmth of hearthfires and gentle hands. The king experienced the fierce protectiveness Davek had shown his foster daughter, while Kira's clanmates touched the desperate love that had driven 18 years of relentless searching. When the light faded, the silence stretched like held breath. "I understand now," the Mountain King said quietly, his voice carrying a wonder that made him sound almost young. "You're not choosing between your natures. You're showing us what we forgot, that they were never meant to be enemies." Kira nodded, the hybrid blade humming with satisfied harmony in her grip. "The question is whether we're brave enough to build something new from what we've learned, or if we'll keep fighting wars that only create more orphans and empty thrones." Around them, weapons slowly lowered as the true test began, not of power or will, but of the courage to forgive and start again. But courage, Kira discovered, was easier to speak of than to practice. As the shared experience faded and individual consciousness reasserted itself, fear crept back into human faces like shadows after sunset. The revelation had been beautiful, transcendent, and terrifying in its implications. "Sorcery," hissed Commander Gareth, the king's senior advisor, his hand moving instinctively to his weapon. "Your Majesty, this is exactly what the old texts warned against. Dragon magic that overwrites human will, makes us forget who we are." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the royal forces, doubts spreading like poison through water. Kira felt their minds closing off one by one, choosing familiar hatred over the vulnerability that change demanded. "It wasn't mind control," she said desperately. "It was truth, showing you what we could build together. What dragons have always promised." Gareth cut her off, drawing his dragonbane sword. The metal gleamed with sickly silver light, enchanted to cause agony to any being with draconic blood. "Before they devoured our children and razed our cities. Your Majesty, the weapon that can end this deception once and for all." Behind Kira, the great black dragon's growl rumbled like approaching avalanche. "They speak of children devoured while they point killing metal at a youngling. Shall we remind them which species has spent centuries hunting the other to near extinction?" "No," Kira said firmly, though sweat beaded on her forehead as Gareth advanced. The dragonbane weapon sent waves of sickening pain through her transformed body, like ice forming in her veins. "Violence is what created this mess. It won't solve anything." "Pretty philosophy from someone hiding behind ancient monsters," Gareth snarled, raising the blade. "But philosophy won't protect your pet humans when we're done with you." The threat to her clanmates shattered Kira's restraint. Draconic fury exploded through her consciousness. Not the controlled power she'd been carefully managing, but raw, primal rage that demanded blood in answer to threats against her family. The hybrid sword flared in her grip, its harmonious song becoming a shriek of barely contained destruction. "Touch them," she whispered, and her voice carried the promise of mountains falling, and learn why dragons were feared. For one terrible moment, she teetered on the knife's edge between protection and massacre. The power sang in her blood, offering simple solutions written in fire and death. She could end this threat, scatter the army, demonstrate exactly why dragons had once ruled these peaks unchallenged. All it would cost was everything she truly was. "Kira," Davik's voice cut through the red haze, steady and unafraid despite the death radiating from her transformed form. "Remember what you forged tonight. Remember why. The hybrid blade, balance, harmony between opposing natures rather than dominance of one over the other." She looked down at the weapon trembling in her grip, seeing her reflection distorted in its impossible surface, human determination warring with draconic fury, love struggling against rage. "I forge my own path," she said, and the words became truth as she spoke them. The destructive energy pouring through her shifted, changing frequency like metal responding to a smith's will. Instead of lashing outward in conquest, it flowed into the blade, into the ground beneath her feet, into the very air around them. The mountain itself responded, not with earthquake or avalanche, but with something far more profound, the deep stone memory of what this place had been before the wars began. Ancient magic stirred in peaks that had watched civilizations rise and fall, and for one impossible moment, the Shadowmere Mountains remembered peace. The memory took visible form around them, ghostly outlines of cities that had once flourished in the passes, images of humans and dragons working together to build wonders that had endured for centuries, gardens that bloomed despite winter's grip, libraries where knowledge was shared rather than hoarded, children playing in courtyards while their guardians, some human, some draconic, watched with equal love. "This is what we lost," the Mountain King breathed, his own weapon forgotten as he stared at the phantoms of possibility. "This is what my father threw away when pride convinced him that cooperation meant weakness." Gareth's Dragonbane's sword wavered, its deadly light flickering as his certainty cracked. Illusions. Dragon lies meant to make us weak. "No," said a new voice, quiet but carrying absolute authority. An elderly woman stepped from the ranks of the royal army, her simple robes marking her as a scholar rather than a warrior. "I know these records. I've spent 40 years studying the fragments that survived the Great Burning. This is truth, not deception." She moved closer to the ghostly visions, tears streaming down her weathered face. "My grandmother told stories of the last cooperation, before fear poisoned everything. She said the dragons wept when they realized what the separation would cost both peoples. Around them, the ancient dragons had gone very still, their massive heads bowed as if in prayer or grief. The largest, Kira's protector and kin, spoke directly into every mind present, its mental voice heavy with centuries of sorrow. "We remember the choosing. We remember the children we could have saved. Had pride not built walls between wisdom and love, we remember, and we mourn." The phantoms faded, but their impact lingered in changed expressions, in weapons lowered by hands that shook with more than fear. The confrontation had become something else entirely, not a battle between enemies, but a reckoning with choices that had shaped centuries of suffering. "The question remains," the Mountain King said slowly, his eyes fixed on Kira with something approaching wonder. "What do we do with truth that demands we admit we were wrong?" Kira stood at the crossroads of history, feeling the weight of every eye upon her, human and dragon alike. The hybrid sword hummed in her grip, its impossible harmony a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions swirling through the assembled armies. Truth hung in the air between them like a blade poised to fall, waiting for someone brave enough to grasp it. "We stop running from what we've done," she said, her voice carrying across the silence with quiet authority. "We face it, we name it, and we choose something different." Commander Gareth's Dragonbane weapon still gleamed with sickly light, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Pretty words, girl, but the dead don't forgive. My brothers died screaming in dragonfire 20 years ago. What truth erases that?" "None," Kira admitted, and the honesty in her voice made several dragons shift uneasily behind her. "Just as nothing erases the hatchlings your forces slaughtered in the Thornspire massacre 5 years before that. We can trade atrocities until the mountains crumble, or we can break the cycle." She took a step toward Gareth, ignoring the waves of pain radiating from his enchanted blade. Each movement cost her. Dragon blood and Dragonbane were mortal enemies, the weapon's magic designed to cause maximum suffering to any creature of her lineage, but she pressed forward anyway, letting everyone see what her choice demanded. "Breaking cycles requires sacrifice," she continued, her voice steady despite the agony creeping through her veins. "Someone has to be willing to lose something precious for everyone else to win." The Mountain King's expression shifted, sudden understanding and alarm warring across his features. "Kira, what are you—" "I know what I am," she interrupted gently, never taking her eyes from Gareth's weapon. "The bridge between worlds, the living proof that cooperation is possible. The heir you've searched for, the daughter you need to legitimize your claim to these mountains. Another step closer. The Dragonbane's influence intensified, making her transformed skin feel like it was dissolving from within. Behind her, the great black dragon rumbled with protective fury, but she held up one hand to forestall intervention. I also know what ending this war will cost. Her voice grew softer, more personal, as she met her father's eyes. A symbol can't choose sides. A bridge can't favor one bank over the other. If I'm going to unite these peoples, I can't belong fully to either of them. Understanding dawned in the king's face like sunrise after the longest night, followed immediately by the kind of devastation that only comes from getting exactly what you thought you wanted. No. 18 years I've searched. I won't lose you again the moment I find you. You're not losing me, Kira said, though tears tracked silver down her scaled cheeks. You're letting me become what I was meant to be, what this war needs me to be. She was close enough to touch Gareth's blade now, the Dragonbane's proximity sending waves of nausea through her hybrid system. Around them, the assembled forces watched in absolute silence, sensing that they were witnessing something that would reshape everything they thought they knew about power and sacrifice. The old ways demanded choosing, Kira said, addressing both armies simultaneously. Human or dragon, king's daughter or clansmith's apprentice. But choice implies ownership, and some things, some people, are too important to be owned. She reached out slowly, deliberately, and placed her palm against the flat of Gareth's Dragonbane sword. The touch sent liquid fire through every nerve, dragon magic and anti-dragon enchantment warring within her transformed flesh. She screamed, couldn't help herself, but didn't pull away. Instead, she pushed her own power into the weapon, letting the hybrid blade in her other hand channel the same harmony she'd forged between her opposing natures. The Dragonbane's sickly silver light began to shift, changing frequency as human determination and draconic strength flowed into it together. I renounce my claim to the mountain throne, she gasped through the pain, her words carrying over the shocked murmurs rippling through both armies. And to the right of inheritance among dragons. I choose neither crown nor hoard. The weapon in her palm began to change, its anti-dragon enchantments transforming into something else, not destruction, but connection. The same force that had torn apart her hybrid nature was being forged into a tool for unity, turned from weapon into symbol. Instead, she continued, her voice growing stronger as the blade's transformation neared completion, I choose to serve as witness, as mediator, as the reminder of what we can build when we stop trying to own each other and start trying to understand. The Dragonbane weapon finished its metamorphosis, becoming something that had never existed before, a blade that could channel both human will and draconic power without destroying either. Gareth stared at it in wonder, no longer feeling its familiar weight, but something entirely new. Kira released the transformed sword and stepped back, swaying slightly from the effort. The sacrifice was complete, carved not in flesh but in possibility. The future she might have had, traded for the one everyone needed her to create. The war ends now, she announced, because I refuse to inherit it. The silence that followed her declaration stretched like a held breath across the mountainside. For a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, the weight of Kira's words hung in the air between the assembled armies, waiting to see whether they would take root or shatter against centuries of hatred. Then the Mountain King dropped to one knee. The gesture rippled through his forces, like a stone cast into still water. Nobles who had spent their lives bowing to no one found themselves following their sovereign's lead, armor clanking as they knelt before the girl who had just renounced the very throne they served. Behind Kira, the ancient dragons lowered their great heads in a mirror of respect, acknowledgement flowing between species that had forgotten how to speak without bloodshed. My daughter, the king said, and his voice carried a grief that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with profound recognition. Forgive a foolish father who tried to cage the wind. Kira swayed on her feet, the transformation of the Dragonbane weapon having drained more from her than she'd expected. Finn was beside her in an instant, his steady presence anchoring her as exhaustion threatened to buckle her knees. The hybrid sword in her grip had grown heavy, its harmonious song now a whisper of completed purpose. "There's nothing to forgive," she managed, though speaking required more effort than it should have. "We all made choices with the knowledge we had. The question now is what we choose with the knowledge we've gained." Commander Gareth stood frozen, staring at the transformed weapon in his hands. Where once the Dragonbane had radiated cold hatred, now it hummed with something indefinable, not the harsh unity of conquest, but the gentler harmony of cooperation freely chosen. When he looked up, his eyes held the bewilderment of a man whose fundamental worldview had just been rewritten. "I don't understand," he said simply. What comes after this?" "Work," said Davek, his gruff voice cutting through the metaphysical confusion with practical honesty. The smith stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the gathered forces, same as any other day. "Put down the weapons, pick up tools, and start building something useful instead of tearing each other apart." Mira emerged from behind her husband, her healer's instincts drawing her toward Kira despite the dragons looming nearby. "Child, you're barely standing. What did that spell cost you?" "Everything I thought I wanted," Kira admitted, allowing herself to lean more heavily on Finn's support, "and nothing I actually needed." The great black dragon that had claimed her as kin rumbled softly, its mental voice touching her thoughts with gentle concern. "Young one, you have given much. Are you certain this path leads where you hope?" Kira looked around the assembled crowd. Humans and dragons mixing for the first time in centuries without bloodshed, weapons lowered, faces showing curiosity instead of rage. It wasn't perfect. Fear still lingered in some expressions, and she could feel the fragility of this moment, how easily it could shatter if mishandled. But it was a beginning. "I'm not certain of anything," she admitted, her honesty carrying clearly in the mountain air, "except that the old ways led us here, to children starving while adults played at war, to powers wasted on destruction instead of creation. Maybe it's time to try something nobody's certain about." Jorik, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. The clan leader's face bore the weight of difficult decisions, but also something that might have been hope. "The Iron Peak clan stands ready to learn new ways," he said formally, then added with rare softness, "if our daughter will teach us." The word daughter sent warmth through Kira's exhausted frame. Not heir or weapon or bargaining chip, just daughter, claimed and cherished. She felt the same warmth echoed in the Mountain King's expression, in the protective rumble of her dragon kin, in Davek and Mira's fierce pride. Family, she realized, wasn't about choosing sides. It was about being chosen again and again by those who saw your true self and loved it anyway. "The transition won't be easy," she warned, addressing both armies with what strength remained to her. "There will be setbacks, misunderstandings, people who prefer the clarity of enemies to the complexity of neighbors, but if we can remember this moment, remember what we felt when the barriers came down, maybe we can build something worth the effort." Around them, the first tentative conversations were beginning. A human scholar approached one of the smaller dragons with hesitant questions about ancient texts. A dragon rider offered to share water with an injured clan warrior. Small gestures, fragile as spring flowers, but growing from soil that had been salted with hatred for far too long. The war wasn't ending with grand proclamations or formal treaties. It was ending with tired people choosing to stop fighting, one conversation at a time. And in that choice, Kira found something more valuable than any crown, the knowledge that some sacrifices don't diminish you, but transform you into exactly who you were meant to become. The valley began to empty slowly as the sun climbed higher, delegations from both sides moving toward their respective camps with an energy that spoke more of purpose than retreat. But Kira found herself reluctant to follow any particular group. uncertain for the first time where she truly belonged in this new world she'd helped create. The Mountain King seemed to sense her hesitation. He approached carefully, no longer the desperate father seeking a lost heir, but a man learning to know the woman his daughter had become. "There are rooms waiting in the castle," he offered quietly. "No expectations, no ceremonies, just space if you want it. And if she doesn't?" Davik's question carried no hostility, but the protective edge was unmistakable. The smith's weathered hands rested on Mira's shoulders as they flanked Kira like sentinel mountains, ready to shield her from pressures she'd already proven she wouldn't accept. The king's smile held genuine warmth rather than political calculation. "Then I suppose I'll have to learn what it means to visit rather than rule." Kira studied her birth father's face, seeing echoes of her own determination in the set of his jaw, her stubborn streak reflected in his steady gaze. The star mark at her temple had faded to its usual subtle shimmer, but she felt the connection between them, like a low harmony thrumming just beneath conscious hearing. Blood calling to blood, not in ownership but recognition. "I need to see them first," she said, gesturing toward where Jorik was organizing the Iron Peak delegation. "The people who shaped me before I knew what I was. They deserve to understand what comes next." The clan leader looked up as she approached, his scarred face creasing into something almost like relief. Around him, warriors who had known Kira since childhood stood with the awkward uncertainty of people watching a beloved friend transform into someone they barely recognized. "You look different," said Raven, one of the younger fighters, her voice holding equal parts awe and loss. "Not just the dragon aspects, something deeper." Kira nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "I am different. The girl who left with the Ravenhollow escort couldn't have done what happened here today, but she's still part of me, the part that learned strength from watching Davek shape metal, compassion from helping Mira tend wounds, loyalty from belonging to something larger than herself." She addressed the gathered clan members directly, letting them see the changes while holding onto the core they had helped forge. "I won't be returning to the forges. My path leads elsewhere now. But that doesn't mean I'm abandoning what you taught me about family, about earning your place through service rather than birth." Jorik's expression shifted from uncertainty to understanding. "You're asking us to trust that the values we raised you with will guide these new responsibilities." "I'm asking you to remember that blood doesn't erase love," Kira replied. "I had one father who searched for me across every mountain peak for 18 years. I had another who stood over my forge work and taught me that true strength comes from knowing exactly how much pressure something can bear before it breaks. I need them both." The simple honesty of her words seemed to ease something in the gathered clanfolk. These were people who understood loyalty earned through shared hardship, who valued practical wisdom over pretty speeches. They could accept transformation as long as the essential person remained recognizable. "The forges will miss you," Davek said gruffly, but his pride shone clear as mountain air, "though I suspect you'll be shaping more than metal in the days ahead." Finn stepped closer, his presence steady and warm against her side. Throughout the confrontation, he had remained her anchor point, the reminder that some connections transcended politics or bloodlines or species. Now he squeezed her hand gently, a question in the gesture. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, speaking for everyone present who found themselves navigating uncharted territory. Kira looked around the circle of faces, clan family and birth family, human allies and dragon kin, all united by their willingness to risk everything for a chance at something better. The hybrid sword at her side hummed softly, its impossible harmony reflecting the equally impossible community taking shape around them. "We go everywhere," she said, the answer feeling right as she spoke it. "Between the clans and the kingdom, the human settlements and the dragon aeries, we become living proof that bridges can be built, that cooperation isn't weakness but a different kind of strength." The great black dragon rumbled approval from where it waited with its kin, while the Mountain King nodded slowly, acceptance replacing the desperate need that had driven his long search. "It won't be easy," Kira warned, though her voice carried hope rather than doubt. Being between worlds means never fully belonging to any single one. But maybe that's exactly what these mountains need, someone who can see all sides clearly because she's not bound by any of them. As the various groups began their journeys homeward, Kira remained for a moment longer, watching the place where war had become peace through the simple choice to try something different. She was no longer the mountain teen who had been traded away in desperation, nor quite the lost heir who had been searched for so desperately. She was something new entirely, a bridge made flesh, carrying the love of both worlds as she walked between them. The seasons turned, and with them, the mountains themselves seemed to breathe easier. 6 months after the day weapons became tools of diplomacy, Kira stood on a cliff overlooking what had once been a contested border between clan territory and the kingdom proper. Now it bustled with something unprecedented, a trading post where dragon riders bartered alongside clan smiths, where scholars from the royal libraries shared texts with keepers of ancient draconic lore. Her own transformation had settled into something sustainable. The scaled patches along her arms had found harmony with human flesh, creating patterns that reminded her daily of the balance she'd chosen to embody. The hybrid sword at her side had become less weapon than symbol, its impossible harmony recognized throughout the mountains as the mark of the mediator who belonged to no single faction. The grain shipments from the eastern settlements arrived this morning, Finn reported, approaching with the easy confidence of someone who had found his calling in logistics and negotiation. His role had evolved naturally. Where Kira served as the symbolic bridge between worlds, he had become the practical one, organizing the flow of resources and information that kept their fragile peace growing stronger. "Any difficulties?" she asked, though his relaxed posture suggested otherwise. The opposite. 3 different clan leaders sent more than requested, and the dragons offered to help with transport for the next delivery. He smiled, the expression carrying wonder at how quickly the impossible had become routine. "I think people are starting to believe this might actually work." Below them, a young dragon was teaching a group of human children about wind patterns while their parents negotiated with clan traders for winter supplies. The scene would have been inconceivable a year ago. Now it was simply Tuesday. "Any word from the castle?" Kira asked, settling onto a sun-warmed boulder with the casual grace of someone who had learned to find home in movement rather than place. "Your father requests the honor of your presence at next week's council meeting. There's some disagreement about water rights between the northern settlements and the Stormcrest dragons." Finn's tone carried the careful neutrality they'd both learned when discussing such requests. The Mountain King had kept his word about visiting rather than demanding, but his respect for her choices couldn't entirely hide his desire for more time with the daughter he'd found and lost, and found again in new form. "I'll go," she decided, "though I think I'll stop at the Iron Peak Forges first. Mira mentioned they're having trouble with a fever outbreak, and Davek wanted my opinion on some new alloy experiments." It was a small thing, this ability to move freely between the castle where she'd been born and the clan that had shaped her childhood. But Kira had learned the transformation happened in small steps, daily choices to honor all parts of herself rather than sacrificing some for the convenience of others. A familiar mental touch brushed her awareness, the great black dragon she'd come to think of as her first teacher in the art of being something new. The young ones adapt quickly, the ancient mind observed with satisfaction. Already they play together without thought for what their grandparents would say. "Children are wise that way," Kira replied through the connection that still amazed her with its clarity. "They haven't learned to see differences as threats yet." "Some differences are gifts," the dragon said, and she felt its amusement ripple through the link. As a certain stubborn child proved by refusing to choose between them. The truth of it settled warm in her chest. The girl who had been traded away in desperation had become the woman who traded in hope instead. Not the naive hope that ignored difficulty, but the stubborn hope that believed in the possibility of something better even when the path remained unclear. "Ready to head back?" Finn asked, interpreting her thoughtful silence with the accuracy of someone who had learned to read her moods across 6 months of constant travel and negotiation. Almost. Kira stood, brushing dust from her practical traveling clothes, garments that reflected her new reality, neither royal finery nor clan workwear, but something uniquely her own. "I want to watch the sunset from here. It helps me remember why we're doing this." Together they stood in comfortable silence as the sky blazed through its evening transformation, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson that made the whole world seem touched by magic. From their vantage point, Kira could see the lights beginning to twinkle in settlements that had once viewed each other as enemies, now connected by trade routes and tentative friendships, and the daily miracle of children who played together across species lines. She thought of the girl she'd been, desperate to prove herself worthy of love through strength and skill. That girl couldn't have imagined this moment, standing secure in her own worth, not because she'd conquered something, but because she'd chosen to become a bridge strong enough to bear the weight of other people's hopes. The mountain teen who had been traded away was gone forever. In her place stood someone new, a living reminder that transformation was possible for anyone brave enough to choose it, one conversation at a time.